bountifully. Each of you must give as you have made up your mind, not reluctantly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. You will be enriched in every way for your great generosity, which will produce thanksgiving to God through us. For the rendering of this ministry not only supplies the needs of the saints, but also overflows with many thanksgivings to God. Thanks be to God for his indescribable gift. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Albert Einstein once said, "The value of a man resides in what he gives and not in what he is capable of receiving." Jesus takes it even further when he says, "It is better to give than to receive." On the face of it, this doesn't really make sense. Everything in our world and everything in our human logic would tell us that this is all backwards. Surely it is more blessed to receive than to give. Surely we are richer when we gather and we gain than when we give away. This statement of Jesus sounds upside down. And this morning, we're going to talk about this upside down generosity as we continue our series on paradox in the Christian faith. Remember, a paradox is a truth that consists of two contradictory ideas, and it's a way that Jesus often taught. Today, we're going to look at this paradox. When we give, we receive. And of all the truths we explore in our series, this is probably the most challenging. It isn't hard to understand necessarily, but it is hard to put into practice. Throughout Scripture, we're called to give to others. Jesus asks us to give our time, our effort, our money, our talents to support others. But unfortunately, this runs right smack into a basic problem that affects every human being. We have this reluctance to give. We're cautious about giving because we're concerned about our safety and we're concerned about our security. And when we give our money and our possessions and our time away, it becomes a threat to us. We know that the world is a dangerous place and that accumulating money and possessions might be the only thing that could give us a sense of security and protection from danger. And we want that security and we want that protection. Meanwhile, there is this internal drive that makes us always want more. When you ask people how much is enough, whatever their station in life, from low to middle to high, the answer will always be just a little bit more. And when they get to that next station, just a little bit more. And the next one, just a little bit more. But more is never enough. And greed and consumption, it just grows the appetite for more and more and more. And we certainly know that in our consumer culture, this is only fed by what is all around us. I mean, you can't go a day without being completely bombarded by advertisements on every side telling you what you need to buy, what you need to have, what you need to consume. And then all these things are going to make you feel younger and more beautiful and more important. They'll make you more popular. They'll bring back the feelings of your youth. Who knows? Just think about the amount of money spent on one Super Bowl ad. How long are those things? Like 60 seconds? Less? Millions and millions of dollars. And before that, they've spent hours and hours and hours recording to narrow it down to that tiny little bit of time that's going to cost them so much money to try to sell you whatever they want to sell you. We have a fun thing in our house. It's actually what has made the Super Bowl endurable for me. Kevin loves football, and football is now part of my life. But we play a commercial bingo. So every year we get a card, and then we mark off when the commercial comes. And then if you get the first person who can get a bingo gets their first choice of Shindig's cake slice, which is like our favorite bakery in Richmond. Yeah, we have it in there. So we have like 3 different ones. So, and then there's like 10 or 12 people at the party, so there's like competition. Yeah, it's very American. But anyway, we usually share. If I win, I share. But anyway, it does make the ads especially exciting to think you might get some caramel chocolate cake at the end of it. But the fact is, we don't need any more stuff, and none of that is gonna make our lives any happier or better or richer. You know, miser and miserable have the same root word. And greed and consumption actually make us miserable. We become like a dog on a track chasing after that rabbit that we will never catch. It does not lead to happiness. Many times people who have won the lottery, they actually report that they were happier before they won. Interesting. We all think that that ticket would be the answer. But more stuff, it never is. And this isn't to say that receiving isn't nice. It is certainly blessed to receive. It's always nice to receive. But living to receive and living to accumulate more, it does not make us happy and it does not give us life. And the more we have, actually, the less inclined we are to give, at least proportionally. The wealthiest 5% of Americans actually give the smallest percent of their income annually to charity, while those who make $20,000 a year or less give the greatest percentage of their income. Perhaps they have more compassion because they better understand what it is like to be in want. Perhaps they have greater trust in God's ability to provide. But having more does not make us more generous, at least not proportionally. So our culture tells us that money and possessions and wealth and accumulation, this is going to make us happy. This is going to make us feel safe and secure. It is going to make a good life. This actually flies in the face of experience, and it flies in the face of what our Christian faith teaches us. As Paul said in our passage in 2 Corinthians, you will be enriched in every way for your great generosity, which will produce thanksgiving to God. True enrichment comes from generosity, sharing, and giving, not having and accumulating. Again, our culture, our human tendencies, equate happiness with that feeling of safety and security and control in our lives. But Christianity teaches that happiness comes from giving. Because when we give, we deepen our faith in God, we deepen our relationship with God, and it is our relationship with God that actually brings us true happiness. Too many possessions, too much security can actually get in the way of our relationship with God. They can make us spiritually numb. And so we see this in the contrast between the churches in Macedonia and the church at Corinth, which Paul is writing to in our epistle reading today. The churches in Macedonia were very poor, and they didn't have very much. But they gave generously to that Jerusalem offering. They really wanted to help the people who were struggling in Jerusalem, especially those widows. They gave out of their little all that they could. They gave abundantly and generously. They gave out of joy. They gave out of love. Meanwhile, the Corinthian church was very wealthy, and so far, they had given little. Paul writes encouraging them to give, not just for the sake of increasing the offering, but for their own sake spiritually, for their own growth, for their own happiness and well-being. You will be enriched by generosity, he tells them. Paul feels like their spiritual father, right? And he's trying to encourage them to grow in their relationship with God, to grow in stepping out in faith, to grow in what will bring them life. And giving, this is how they can do this. The Macedonian church is an example of giving sacrificially. And in the Gospel of Mark, Jesus lifts up the example of a widow who gave a very small amount. We often hear that story referred to as the widow's mite offering, just a little bit. But there's something very significant about it because her offering, because her gift was sacrificial, because it cost her. Jesus actually says she gave everything she had. And this isn't to say that we're supposed to give away everything and live on nothing. He's lifting up giving in a way that costs. giving at sacrifice. We don't just give because we have enough to spare or because we think there'll be a reward to giving. We give in a way that costs us. This is actually something sacred. The word sacrifice, from the Latin word sacrare, or sacred, and the suffix facere, which means to make, is that sacrifice literally means to make sacred. Oh, I really said that very well, but to sacred and to make, when put together, make the word sacrifice. Okay, that might have come across more clearly. When we give sacrificially, we are engaging in an act of trust that opens us to God and opens us to more of God's grace. And we're living according to God's example. We have a God who gives and gives and gives. God so loved the world that he gave his only son. And Jesus so loved us that he gave his life. And when we give sacrificially, we display God's nature to the world. It is a sacred thing. So grabbing for ourselves and seeking to accumulate only makes us miserable, but giving sacrificially leads to life. Let me share an example. You know, every year at Christmas time, it seems like there's that one it toy, the toy that's really in that everybody has to have. And the supply of this toy runs short and the demand increases and it gets harder and harder to find, and at a certain point people are just willing to pay exorbitant amounts for whatever this toy is. You don't know what I'm talking about. Well, in 1996, a lot of us remember back then, the toy was Tickle Me Elmo. So when you pushed Elmo's belly, he would make a little giggly sound. Those of you who don't watch Sesame Street, Elmo's this cute little fuzzy red guy with a high-pitched little sweet voice. Okay, so Tickle Me Elmo, you could push his belly, he would giggle. You know, this is kind of early. You didn't have tons and tons of talking toys. This is like advanced technology, right? And the hotter Tickle Me Elmo became, the more parents scrambled to find the ever-diminishing supply of these dolls. People panicked. How can I make my child happy at Christmas if I don't have a Tickle Me Elmo doll? When it was announced that a particular toy store in a suburban area of Philadelphia had managed to procure 48 dolls, 300 people lined up outside that store for hours before it opened. And the 23-year-old assistant manager went to open the doors at 10 in the morning, and all 300 of those people rushed into the store and knocked him over, knocked him to the ground, ran across the top of him, and sent him to the hospital. He remained in critical condition for several days. He almost died. In their greed for this insignificant doll, these 300 people almost destroyed a life. The very same year, 1996, Tickle Me Elmo was involved in another story, but this one has a very different tone. And this one shows how sacrificial giving leads to receiving. Just a few weeks before that assistant manager was stomped into the ground, a young mother purchased a Tickle Me Elmo doll for her son, and she was really excited about it because her son really wanted this doll. She had saved for weeks to buy the doll. She was on disability because of health problems, and so she and her son lived on $600 a month. $400 of that went towards rent, and so the rest was what they lived on. The doll was going to be a special treat for her son for Christmas. And unfortunately, this was going to be a difficult Christmas because somehow her ex-husband had managed to get a hold of her disability check and then cashed it, and so she only was left with $200 to pay the rent and live on. And she didn't know what she was going to do. She wanted so much to give the doll to her son, but after seeing the demand for the doll and how everyone wanted it, she realized she could get a lot of money for it, and the only way out of her dilemma was to sell the doll. She thought she could probably fetch $400 if she sold it. This would mean no presents for her son, but what else could she do? So she took out an ad in the paper offering the doll for $400. The ad read, "Tickle Me Elmo doll for sale. $400, need money to pay rent." She wrote the ad, her heart broke. This was a big sacrifice for her and for her son. A few days later, a knock came to the door, or came on the door. A man came to the door, a knock. A man was there standing And he told her, I've come to buy a Tony Elmo doll. The woman said, well, just wait right here and I'll go get it. And the man responded, well, perhaps I should just give you the money. Merry Christmas. And he handed her the $400 in cash and walked away. I picture him grinning from ear to ear as he walks back to his car. The man just hands her the $400, Merry Christmas, and walks away. Because he knew the secret to inheriting eternal life. And that secret lies in giving. Giving things up, giving things away, giving just because. It lies in giving up things that block our relationship with God, giving up things that block God out. It lies in giving away our time and our money for no other reason than because it is a gift. It lies in making giving a central part of our lives for no other reason than because God has given to us. This man became a gift to another person because he was willing to share in the message of Christmas, the celebration of when God gave to us in Jesus. And the woman, she learned the secret of sacrifice and return. Because she was willing to make a sacrifice, God responded in love by sending that man to give her a gift of grace. Such a different spirit than the 300 who stormed a toy store and almost killed a man. The spirit of greed led to destruction and nearly to death. The spirit of sacrifice led to greater life and to love. There is indeed a law of spiritual return when it comes to giving. Jesus says, give and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put in your lap. For the measure you give will be the measure you get back. This doesn't mean we give in order to get a reward, or that when we give, we are compensated in kind by God. There's actually something much deeper that takes place. When we give, especially when we give sacrificially, when we give because our faith compels us and we feel called upon by God to do so, we deepen our relationship with God and we ourselves receive in the process. Not a reward system, but an expression of love. By loving others and letting God's love inspire our giving, we become open to receiving God's love and open to all that God would give us in return. We are open to the whole kingdom of God, and we experience that kingdom. We experience God at a whole new level. In the book, The Paradox of Generosity, Christian Smith and Hilary Davidson published their extensive research on the results of generosity. Their findings support the case that generosity is by nature paradoxical, that in giving we receive and in grasping we lose. Again, the logic of the world would say generous gives a cost and generosity produces a deficit. But what Smith and Davidson discovered was the results of generosity were often, as they say, unexpected, counterintuitive, and win-win. Rather than generosity producing net losses, in general, the more generously people give of themselves, the more of many goods they receive in turn. Sometimes they receive more of the same kind of thing that they gave, money, time, attention, and so forth. But more often, and importantly, generous people tend to receive back goods that are more valuable than those they gave. Happiness, health, physical health, which I find interesting, a sense of purpose, and personal growth. And their book, The Paradox of Generosity, is filled with statistical analysis that backs up these claims. And I bet if we think about it, each of us have witnessed firsthand lives that demonstrated upside down paradoxical generosity, or the misery that comes from being miserly. Think about the most generous person you know. Or if not the most, because that's sort of hard, a very generous person you know. Now, think about a person you know that is consumed with accumulating, that just seems to want more, that really seems to just be out for themselves. Can you picture a person like that? Now think about who is happier, and also who do you want to be around? I'd like to say just a few words as we come toward the conclusion about giving as a spiritual practice. How does giving help us grow closer to God? First, when we give, we acknowledge the reality, we live into the reality that everything in life is first God's gift to us. Everything we are and everything we have comes from God. And when we see things in this way, it changes our perspective. One father writes, "My attitude toward giving reminds me of how my young sons used to respond when I asked them for one of their French fries. You know, the ones I just bought them? Under great duress, they would sort through the scraps and find one short enough to spare." You all can picture this. I can totally picture this. He says, "That's how I often treat God, even though all I have comes from Him." You know, this image of the French fries, and your dad just bought you French fries, and he asked for one, and you're sorting through to give him like the littlest dried up little bit you don't even want to eat. It was really convicting. I don't think I do it with French fries, but there are things in my life that are very precious to me that I probably share the same attitude as this boy, and it was convicting. Do I treat God that way, even though He bought me the French fries in the first place? Richard Foster says, God's ownership of everything changes the kind of question we ask in giving. Rather than how much of my money should I give to God, we learn to ask, how much of God's money should I keep for myself? And the difference between those two questions is of monumental proportions. So we acknowledge that everything we have comes from God. And we have an opportunity to give to God by giving to others. God doesn't mean anything, but when we give to His children, when we give to His mission, when we give to His kingdom and His purposes, it's a way we give to Him, and it's a way we bless Him and bless His heart. So we acknowledge that God is the source of everything, and we also get an opportunity to give to God and to say thank you by giving to others. Also, giving puts us in a posture of humility. As we put less focus on ourselves and more focus on God, it puts us in that humble place. Finally, giving displays a posture of trust. And I think this is at the core of what makes this paradox so difficult and the most difficult thing we're going to talk about in this series. Because giving requires trust. Giving requires that we trust God for our safety and our security and our well-being. Instead of relying on our money or our possessions to shield us, to bring us comfort or control, we rely on God. We enact a tangible demonstration that we put trust in God to be our security by giving things away, by giving resources away, by giving money away. We say, I trust God. I trust God takes care of me. I trust God is my protection. I trust God is my security. I trust God holds my life. And this is part of what makes giving frightening to begin. But once we do begin, we find it fun and life-giving, and we want to do it again. I've heard giving compared to jumping off a high dive. It's like you standing at the high dive and you make your way out to the end, and it's a long way down to the swimming pool. You look down and you think, I'm not so sure I want to do this. This is really uncomfortable. This is really frightening. This seems really hard. But after you jump, it's so much fun, you want to do it again. And then you spend the next 3 hours jumping off the high dive. But the first time, it is an act of will, not an act of joy. The first time, it is an act of obedience. It is an act of trust. Once we do give, once the momentum gets going, it's a lot of fun. You want to keep going for hours. When you first begin to live generously, it feels like everything's coming undone. It's stretching and uncomfortable. But slowly you begin to realize there's more to life than what you own, and more to life than what you can hold on to. And you begin to understand what true abundance is, and you start to live. So we're called to give our time and our talents and our resources and ourselves, our money. If we aren't giving a tithe 10% of our income, we can begin